Okay, we're heading into our last set of notes for this week. This one we're going to finish covering the French Revolution. So we kind of talked about the background of the French Revolution yesterday, what happened leading up to it, what some of the problems were, why people are upset with the government of France. The king has all the money and all the wealth, and it doesn't make its way down to the people. The Estates General is not really doing a good job of representing the people, and the king doesn't even listen to them anyway. It's kind of aligned with the three votes that the clergy and nobility always vote together, and the commoners kind of get left out with their vote, so they're always overruled. And then a couple of years with really bad harvests. Certainly something that's not good for the peasants and the farmers of France. So they're all very, very upset too. So they have the revolution in 1789. They overthrow the government, um, and they come up with a brand new system. So here we're going to talk a little bit about the new system in France and ultimately some problems that resulted from the creation of this new system. Okay, so first of all, the new France. Some basics on that. So after the overthrow of the French government, one thing they do is they establish their new system of government that's very loosely based off of what we do in the United States. Now, if you remember, there were important Frenchmen in the early days of American history, people like Lafayette that came and helped and kind of like shadowed George Washington during the American Revolution to learn more about America. There are also people like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, um, who really loved France and French culture for some strange reason, um, and were beloved figures in France. So, because of that, the French really admired what America had done, and this new French government, these new people that have come in and taken over, have are really kind of basing their system in many ways kind of off the United States. More on that in a second. One thing they do right away is they significantly limit the power of the monarchy. They don't totally get rid of it just yet. Now, eventually they will, and they'll kill the king, Louis XVI, and his wife, Marie Antoinette. But at first, they kind of just leave them there. It's kind of like England is today, where the monarch, where Queen Elizabeth is kind of just a figurehead. Really, it's the prime minister that makes most of the important political decisions for England, and it's been that way for quite some time, right? But here in France, they greatly limit the power of monarchy and, look to establish their own government much more effectively. Now, this slide, of course, is going to talk largely about problems that happen. So let's get into some of these, okay? Well, and I mentioned this towards the end of the notes last time. Uh, the French moved really, really fast. Bastille Day was July 14th, 1789. By early August, August 3rd, they had established this new constitution, the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and of the Citizen. They wrote it together really fast. They passed it through their government. It became their new system of government really, really quickly. Okay, uh, that's not so good because you're doing this all really, really fast. You're not taking time, right? It's all kind of a rough draft. So there's so many holes in this new system of government that it's doomed from the start to kind of end up falling apart and ultimately have your government fall into the hands of people that probably might not be so good. Okay, and unfortunately, that's what happens during something called the Reign of Terror. So in 1793, there was a group called the Committee of Public Safety. The Committee of Public Safety, and their leader was a guy named Maximilian Robespierre. And they decide rather than limiting the power of the monarchy, it should just be gotten rid of. And all these old nobles and clergy members and other political officials that had risen to prominence were bad guys too. So, as you can imagine, in something called the Reign of Terror, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to terrorize people. They're going to kill people. As you see in the picture here, hopefully you recognize that. That is a picture of a guillotining. This guy here is supposed to be Robespierre, is a coloring or painting or whatever of Robespierre. just after they beheaded somebody for some sort of crime. You can see here is the rest of the person's body. Guillotining was a particularly brutal and public way to scare people and um, intimidate people for crimes. They would have very public executions um, where people would come watch because French people are weird and gross. People would come watch as people convicted of various crimes, some bad, some not so bad, some totally ridiculous, would be publicly executed, and they take the head up and show it to the public, and that'd be it. I think that'd be a pretty bad way to die. Like if I was going to be, so somebody once did that was getting guillotined, did a science experiment that said as soon as he was beheaded, he wanted somebody to um, keep count of his blinking eyes afterwards because he was going to blink as long as his brain still functioned because he believed that people survived at least briefly after they were beheaded, that they would realize what had happened to them. You'd be unable to talk or anything, but your brain would still function temporarily. So it's believed that somebody can actually survive 12 to 15 seconds after after you've been beheaded, that you can experience for a brief time. Okay, I don't have a body anymore, which would be kind of weird. Like if somebody cut my head off, man, I'd be pissed, you know. But I would request, though, I guess, if I was going to be beheaded, I would tell the people, the guy doing it after he chopped my head off at the guillotine, could you like take my head and like throw it into the crowd? So at least during those 12 seconds before I'm totally dead, brain dead, I can like experience flight and see what that's like. Like that'd be cool, I guess. Anyway, so what else? So anyway, Robespierre is a really, really bad guy. Over the course of this reign of terror, they publicly execute as many as 40,000 people uh, at the guillotine. Others are shot to death and thrown in rivers because we like to throw dead people in rivers, which is kind of strange. So France is becoming more and more of a mess, and it seems that this new government, the Committee on Public Safety, maybe is even worse than what we had before. So, talked about the guillotine there, and France is in real trouble. So let's fast forward a few years. Now, you've watched a video on Napoleon, so you should know a little bit about him. We're going to go over a few more details on him here. Okay, so I'm not going to go into his youth or anything like that because you got it all in the video, but um, Napoleon quickly rises to great significance as a successful general. A couple things about Napoleon. People use the term Napoleon complex to men that think they're short, so they have to prove themselves. It's funny because Napoleon wasn't really short. He was about 5'7", 5'8", which was normal height for a man from France in the 1700s. But for whatever reason, he's often depicted as short. Napoleon was an excellent general, maybe the best general the world had seen since the likes of somebody like a Julius Caesar or somebody like that. This person was ultimately a powerful, influential, and dangerous man. He conquered just about every place he wanted to conquer. 70 million people, as said in the video you watched, 70 million people fell under the rule of Napoleon, which is a lot of people for back then. Famously, when he conquered Egypt, Napoleon there was a gold cap over the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you look at pictures of it now, you can see there's kind of a two-tone color to the limestone at the top of the pyramid, at the Great Pyramid. It used to be covered with a golden cap. Napoleon had it melted down for his own use when he had conquered Egypt. I'm not quite sure how they did that, but whatever. Um, France under Napoleon, at least for a brief time, becomes certainly the most powerful country in Europe, if not the world. What he really wants to do is become the next Roman emperor. Okay, become basically as powerful as any Roman Empire was. Uh, Oftentimes, uh, we talk about the Third Reich in reference to Hitler. Um, the First Reich is often regarded as the rule of the Roman Empire. The Second Reich is often referred to as Napoleon's rule over Europe. Third Reich, of course, is what Hitler believed he would be creating during his time in Nazi Germany, right? Uh, Also, kind of like Hitler, Napoleon only ruled for a short period of time, right? From 1799 to 1815 is when Napoleon was in power in France. And during that time, he was very, very influential and certainly really strengthened the power of France. One of the most important or long-lasting creations of Napoleon was another code. Now we remember what a code is a set of laws. Remember the Justinian Code and the Hammurabi's Code and stuff like that. Now I said, the Code of Justinian had been around for such a long time, and had taken all those laws that had gotten kind of out of hand. And the Napoleonic Code kind of does the same thing as the Code of Justinian. It basically simplified and recoded all the laws that existed in France and other parts of Europe. In the 1,000 or so years since Justinian's code had been written, there are like 300 new sets of laws. Napoleon simplifies it, comes up with a new simplified code. Again, many of the aspects of that code still exist today. Now, Napoleon's downfall happens in very much the same way that Hitler's downfall will also happen. Napoleon's ego gets the best of him, and eventually decides to invade Russia. He invades Russia in 1814, and that turns out to be a big failure. Many of his soldiers die. In fact, he brought an army of 600,000 to invade Russia. And it just so happened that that winter, Russia had like the worst winter in the history of Russia. It got so cold there that a lot of people died of exposure, of freezing, and all that. By the time Napoleon returned after his failed attempt to take over Russia, uh, of the 600,000 men he brought with him, only 40,000 returned. Many of them dead and left behind, other ones just having deserted. Napoleon, because of this, the people kind of turn against him, kick him out of power. A couple years later, he returns and has his famous Battle of Waterloo against the Duke of Wellington in England, where he's defeated once again. Napoleon gets exiled again, and that is the end of the story of Napoleon. He gets exiled to the island of St. Helena, where he lives for about 4 or 5 years before he dies. Uh, Again, for a time, though, we saw Napoleon was probably the most important and most powerful person in the world since the height of the Roman Empire. Powerful, influential, and seemingly unbeatable when it came to conflict and battle. So, um, well, so I want to take you a look at a couple pictures here. This is kind of a before and after, right? This is how much images matter. We talk a lot about fake news today and people's perception of the news and how it affects our view of the world around us. When things are going well, Napoleon is depicted as a heroic figure who can't be defeated in battle, who's triumphantly upon a horse. Here, a little bit later, after the invasion of Russia, Napoleon is being depicted very differently, right? Um, Again, as kind of a tired, beaten, strange-looking man taking skinny or even dead-looking, skeleton-looking soldiers in a pointless fight against the British or whoever you want that to be. Perception goes a long way. Our media back then was often print media and stories and things that we would look at in pictures, right? We already talked about satire. This is a glorification of Napoleon on your left. On your right is a satire of Napoleon and what he has become. And we'll talk about this more in class on Thursday. All right. Again, at the height of Napoleon's power, notice he took over almost all of Europe. Even like Spain as an ally, the Austrian Empire as an ally, and pretty much anything else here, here is almost entirely controlled by Napoleon. So, height of his powers in 1812, and that is kind of the height of the influence of Napoleon, and that influence also kind of goes down here well into Africa too. All right, so let's compare for a minute, and then we'll be done for this week, except for your quiz on Friday and your Napoleon video due tomorrow. Let's compare the American and French Revolution a little bit, because remember, the Revolution, or the French one, was inspired by the American Revolution. So, in America, on July 4th, 1776, we write our Declaration of Independence. That, of course, is followed by the war with England. We declare our independence. Britain doesn't want that. We go to war. After the establishment of our system of government called the Articles of Confederation, we write the Articles of Confederation. That's also what we call our first form of government. That lasted for 9 years. In 1887, after something called Shays' Rebellion, we're not going to talk about that until AP US History. After something called Shays' Rebellion, we realized that this Articles of Confederation system isn't going to work. So we peacefully come together, write and create a new constitution, and ratify the Constitution 4 years later through the creation of the Bill of Rights. Note in this time, we realized on our own that this Articles of Confederation isn't going to work, right? So we peacefully come up with a solution. And ever since then, since 1791, essentially, we've been operating as a country under the same Constitution, under the same system of government. So the United States government, technically, as we know it, has been in existence for 219 years, according to this comparison. Let's look at France. France, on July 14th, 1789, they have the storming of the Bastille, effectively their Independence Day. What follows is a civil war, right? Or fighting within the French monarchy and the common man, which happens immediately afterward, but is relatively short-lived. And within a month, we have the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and of the Citizen. They took a couple weeks to write their constitution. We basically took about 11 years, and then 4 more to make sure it worked for everybody. So pretty quickly done and very hastily and ineffectively done by the French. They get their constitution ratified pretty quickly, 1791, and people don't like it. And very quickly, the government falls apart. In 1792, we have anarchy. The government totally falls apart. So when a government falls apart, you usually get somebody bad that takes over. This, of course, is the Committee of Public Safety. Committee of Public Safety and Robespierre are really bad. They institute the Reign of Terror. Lots of people get killed. People don't like that. So we get rid of Robespierre. He actually died by the guillotine too. And we have anarchy again. No government at all. After that, for about 4 years, they come up with something called the Directory. This is a group of kind of 5 leaders who would be like senators in the U.S., be like 5 leaders that kind of manage and run the government for about 5 years here. So for a short period, it's this group of 5, or the group, what they call them, like the team of 5 or the group of 5. They called them for a while. So they run France for about 5 years, but they're only so-so. So in 1799, Napoleon comes in and puts himself in charge, first making himself consul because he loved Rome, and then later declaring himself Emperor of France in 1804. He lasts until about 1815, and what happens in 1815? Well, the French people are like, gosh, whatever we do doesn't really work. I know, we'll go back to the king system that we had fought, to monarchy, which we had fought all the way back 26 years ago to get rid of. So they go back to the son of, they go back to the grandson of Louis the 16th, which was King Louis the 18th, obviously. And he's in there for a while, but then they're like, yeah, we don't like this either. So we're going to start another system of government. As of today, the French are on what's called their 5th Republic. So in all that time in which the United States has essentially had one system of government, or 2, if you want to count the peaceful move from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution, our current system, the French have had monarchy. The Constitution under the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen. That's 2. Committee on Public Safety. That's 3. The Directory. That's 4. Napoleon. That's 5. Back to monarchy. That's 6. And 5 separate republics that have come and gone since then. So that is 11. So in roughly the same time frame, while the United States has had a successful government for 219 years, the French have had 11 different governments. All right, that's everything for Two Times in Anarchy there. Important to note that as well. That's everything for the French Revolution and Enlightenment. Remember, we have a quiz on Friday. And yeah, see you later, folks.